Constantine had not converted at the time of this big Sunday law. Constantine did not officially convert until 2 years after the Council of Nicaea. People look back to his decision to paint the Chi Rho on the shields of his men at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge as a conversion experience. He didn't convert for years after that. It was a politically motivated decision. The reason it's not fair to the Catholic Church to accuse them of deceiving the whole world is simply that the Roman Catholic Church has always been very open about their role in this legislation. They don't deny it. They're not hiding anything. Furthermore, the reason those assumptions are inaccurate is that the Sunday law was actually civil legislation which outlawed the biblical lunisolar calendar and enforced Julian calendation upon Christians and Jews. Constantine's quote-unquote Sunday law laid the foundation for a massive deception. A deception on which entire religions base their religious observance. It laid the foundation for the deception that Sunday is the true day of the resurrection and Saturday is the Bible Sabbath. Constantine was a consummate politician. All of his acts need to be viewed from the understanding that they were politically motivated. Christianity was made by him, Constantine, the religion of the state. But paganism was not persecuted, though discouraged. The Christianity of the emperor himself has been a subject of warm controversy, both in ancient and modern times. But the graphic account which Niebuhr gives of Constantine's belief seems to be perfectly just. Speaking of the murder of his co-emperor Licinius and his own son Crispus, Niebuhr remarks, "Many judge of him by too severe a standard because they look upon him as a Christian, but I cannot regard him in that light. The religion which he had in his head must have been a strange compound indeed. The man who had on his coins the inscription Sol Invictus, who worshipped pagan divinities, consulted the haruspices, indulged in a number of pagan superstitions, and, on the other hand, built churches, shut up pagan temples, and interfered with the Council of Nicaea, must have been a repulsive phenomenon, and was certainly not a Christian. He did not allow himself to be baptized till the last moments of his life, and those who praise him for this do not know what they are doing. He was a superstitious man, and mixed up his Christian religion with all kinds of absurd superstitions and opinions. To speak of him as a saint is a profanation of the word." Constantine's veneration of Sunday was not religiously motivated. It was politically motivated. Philip Schaff, the renowned church historian, warns against reading too much into Constantine's quote-unquote Sunday law. In History of the Christian Church, Volume 2, he states, "The Sunday law of Constantine must not be overrated. He enjoined the observance, or rather forbade the public desecration of Sunday, not under the name of Sabbatum, Sabbath, or Dies Domini, Lord's Day, but under its old astrological and heathen title, Dies Solis, Sun's Day, familiar to all his subjects, so that the law was as applicable to the worshippers of Hercules, Apollo, and Mithras as to the Christians. There is no reference whatever in his law, either to the fourth commandment or to the resurrection of Christ." J. Westbury Jones, in his book Roman and Christian Imperialism, concurs with Schaff's statement. He says, "How such a law would further the designs of Constantine, it is not difficult to discover. It would confer a special honor upon the festival of the Christian church, and it would grant a slight boon to the pagans themselves. In fact, there is nothing in this edict which might not have been written by a pagan. The law does honor to the pagan deity whom Constantine had adopted as his special patron god, Apollo, or the sun. The very name of the day lent itself to this ambiguity. The term Sunday, Dies Solis, was in use among Christians as well as pagans. Again, Constantine's Sunday law was politically motivated. There are a number of historians who believe that Constantine wanted to align himself with Christianity for the sole purpose of getting more soldiers to fight in his army. The time was ripe for a reconciliation of state and church, each of which needed the other. It was a stroke of genius in Constantine to realize this and act upon it. He offered peace to the church, provided that she would recognize the state and support the imperial power. Constantine was an equal opportunity monarch. While the Christians hailed him as the blessed prince and the servant of God, to the pagans, Constantine remained for all of his life Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the pagan religion. Constantine demanded unity. He forced compromise through an unexpected way, calendar reform. The point of contention appeared deceptively simple: Passover versus Easter. However, the issues at stake were immense. The only way to determine Passover is to use the lunisolar calendar. And so, because the seventh-day Sabbath was also calculated from the first visible crescent, just like Passover, any ruling in favor of Easter being calculated by a Julian date would also affect the seventh-day Sabbath. Prior to this time, Christians had observed Passover and ignored the Christian Easter. Since the 2nd century AD, there had been a divergence of opinion about the date for celebrating the Paschal Easter anniversary of the Lord's Passion, death, burial, and resurrection. The most ancient practice appears to have been to observe the 14th, the Passover date, 15th and 16th days of the lunar month, regardless of the day of the Julian week these dates might fall on from year to year. Once again, the biblical calendar did not have a continuous weekly cycle. Therefore, in the continuously cycling Julian weeks, the dates of Passover, when figured off of the phases of the moon, varied from year to year. The bishops of Rome, desirous of enhancing the observance of Sunday as a church festival, ruled that the annual celebration should always be held on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday following the 14th day of the lunar month. In Rome, Friday and Saturday of Easter were fast days, and on Sunday the fast was broken by partaking of the communion. This controversy lasted almost 2 centuries until Constantine intervened in behalf of the Roman bishops and outlawed the other group. Up until the Council of Nicaea, the Christian Easter, especially in the East, had been celebrated for the most part at the time of the Jewish Passover, and indeed upon the days calculated and fixed by the Sanhedrin in Judea for its celebration. On the contrary, in Europe, some earlier, some later, were intercalating the months. The Europeans were placing their cycle at the equinox and were celebrating the Passover on the next full moon after the equinox. These contentions had agitated the churches of Asia since the time of the Roman bishop Victor, who had persecuted the churches of Asia for following the 14th day heresy, as they called it, in reference to the Passover. But at the Council of Nicaea, the last thread was snapped, which connected Christianity with its parent stock. The future Easter observance was to be rendered independent of Jewish calculation according to these words, which have been attributed to Constantine. Henceforward, let us have nothing in common with this odious people. Our Savior has shown us another path. It would indeed be absurd if the Jews were able to boast that we are not in a position to celebrate the Passover without the aid of their rules. This is civil legislation enforcing the Julian calendar. Calendars calculate time, and at the Council of Nicaea it was determined to remain independent of Jewish calculation. The Council of Nicaea decreed that no Christians, it went so far as to enforce no Jewish calculation by the Jews either. The paganized Christians did not want anything to do with the Jews. They did not want to be associated with the Jews in any way. And yes, anti-Semitism did play a big role in that decision. This fact was acknowledged by conservative Roman Catholic scholar and apologist Patrick Madrid. On January 5, 2006, Madrid hosted Open Line, which is a radio call-in show on EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Apparently, a caller called in and said, "My brother-in-law says that the Catholic Church changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, so Saturday is really the true Bible Sabbath. What do you say?" Madrid's comments are very enlightening.
Well, what we have to remember is, first of all, what Jesus said. He said, don't forget that man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. And the Lord himself, we're told, was the Lord of the Sabbath, so he had the authority in areas as far as how we would observe that commandment. What your brother-in-law may not understand is that the Catholic Church did not change that commandment. The Catholic Church observes the commandment to keep holy the Sabbath, but it does so on the Lord's Day. And the earliest Christians transferred their observance of that commandment from Saturday to Sunday.
Okay, it is true that there were Christians early on worshiping on Saturday. We have evidence of that in the previous presentation, the words of Tertullian, saying that those who worshipped on Saturday were themselves deviating from a Jewish custom, those who worshipped by the Jewish calendar. So simply because some transferred their worship from Saturday to Sunday does not prove that Saturday was the biblical Sabbath. It simply reveals what a confusion of faith was occurring during that process of amalgamation. Madrid's comments go on.
First of all, because there was a distinct break between the Old Testament requirements, the rituals and Mosaic covenant demands dealing with the Sabbath worship and animal sacrifices and that sort of thing. And they wanted to show that Christianity was distinct from Judaism. It came from Judaism, but it was distinct from it. Celebrating the Lord's coming, celebrating the Lord's resurrection and death on the day that he rose from the dead seemed to be the most appropriate. The other thing that we should remember, too, is that our calendar that we follow, including Seventh-day Adventists, is not only a calendar that was devised by the Catholic Church, but also it is a calendar that's based upon the solar year, not the lunar year. And the Jewish calendar that was observed in the time of Christ it follows a lunar calendar, which is several days short of the solar calendar. So the great irony is that even the Seventh-day Adventists themselves are not worshiping on exactly the same Sabbath day as the Jews at the time of Christ, because it's several days off now, having switched to following the lunar calendar.
Again, it is unfair to accuse the Roman Catholic Church of deception and duplicity. They have always been very open that they have changed the calendar. Here's a sampling of just a few comments, and in our book Calendar Fraud there's a lot more, but here's just a few samplings of writers, Roman Catholic writers, acknowledging that fact. The Sunday is purely a creation of the Catholic Church. Sunday is the law of the Catholic Church alone. They, the Protestants, deem it their duty to keep the Sunday holy. Why? Because the Catholic Church tells them to do so. They have no other reason. The observance of Sunday thus comes to be an ecclesiastical law entirely distinct from the divine law of Sabbath observance. The author of the Sunday law is the Catholic Church. This next quote was taken from the Catholic Encyclopedia, published by Harvard University, and it is even more clear that Christ did not change the Sabbath to Sunday. The Roman Catholic Church did. The commandments, or Decalogue, written by the finger of God on 2 tables of stone, this divine code was received from the Almighty by Moses amid the thunders of Mount Sinai. Christ resumed these commandments in the double precept of charity, love of God and of neighbor. He proclaimed them as binding under the new law in Matthew 19 and in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5. He also amplified or interpreted them. The Church, on the other hand, after changing the day of rest from the Jewish Sabbath, or 7th day of the week, to the first, made the 3rd commandment refer to Sunday as the day to be kept holy as the Lord's day. The Council of Trent condemns those who deny that the 10 Commandments are binding on Christians.